Well, I think it starts with the fact that my last name is Hoops. If there was ever a name that was meant to be in Indiana, it's Hoops.
In basketball terms, Leonard Hoops is a slam dunk, producing big numbers, putting Central Indiana tourism on a national stage. But how did a guy born in the Caribbean, the son of a chief petty officer, raised on the West Coast, with dreams of winding up on Saturday Night Live, wind up here? A Hoosier, the captain in charge of Central Indiana's $5 billion convention and tourism industry. Find out next on the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Leonard Hoops has served as president and CEO of Visit Indy for 10 years, a decade of growth. Under his leadership, Indianapolis has been named the #1 convention city in America by USA Today, a top visitor destination by the New York Times, Condé Nast Traveler, and Travel and Leisure. But that is only part of the Leonard Hoops story. He was born in Trinidad, grew up in California, and initially wanted to be a sports writer so that he could be a part of big-time events like the Super Bowl and the Indy 500. Leonard got his wish, but not through sports reporting, but rather through tourism. And I'm pleased to be joined by Visit Indy President and CEO Leonard Hoops, a key player in Hoosier business with also a sense of humor that serves him well, and one we think that you're really going to enjoy. Leonard, as always, it's great to be with you.
Pleasure to be with you, Gary. Thanks for having me.
You have a fascinating story and really an interesting path that led you to Indianapolis. But really want to start in the present with what really has been a very difficult, to put it mildly, a devastating 12 months for the tourism industry. Are you beginning to see any light at the end of the tunnel? How soon might it be before things return to normal?
I think in terms of sustained recovery, we're probably not going to see that until late summer, August or sometime in that neighborhood. We have had a great first quarter. We've had a lot of youth sports getting us by. Going back to the second week of January, we've had at least one youth sporting event every single weekend, and that will continue all the way through the March Madness tournament. So we're having a really good first quarter, but it starts to level off again in April and May after March Madness is done. And I think by the end of the summer, that's when you'll see sustained recovery.
You mentioned March Madness, and that's all 67 teams coming to Indiana, primarily Indianapolis, but also up in West Lafayette, down in Bloomington as well. How much of a godsend is that to the tourism business?
Well, it's unquestionably huge. We're going to have 3 or so weeks of really strong hotel occupancy, a lot of people downtown. Obviously, downtown, if anywhere needs it, in particular, it's getting some energy back downtown that's really been impacted more than anything, frankly, by the fact that the workforce isn't in the office towers. And so I think March Madness is going to have a lot of different impacts, media spotlight, the economic impact of the time, and it'll reverberate, I think, for weeks and even years beyond the actual event.
But I think I saw a memo that you sent out here, maybe even today. You don't want people to get too overly optimistic about the impact of March Madness.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a V-shaped economic impact because you start off, as you noted, with 68 teams, and they've got 34 people per traveling party, and then they can invite 6 family and friend members, into town themselves. So you start off probably in the neighborhood of 15,000 people, but it's a single elimination tournament. And all of a sudden, those numbers get cut in half with every single round, and by the middle of the tournament, you're back down to 3,000 to 5,000 people, which is still important, but it's not nearly with the same impact you would for a traditional Final Four. And then on the back end, when you get to the Final Four, if we're fortunate enough to have fans, we might be back up to 15, 20,000 people for the games again. So I really think it's going to be a V-shaped impact.
Take us inside the meeting rooms as you put that deal together. There had to be a million different moving parts. What was it like putting the deal together to bring the entire tournament to Indiana?
Well, Visit Indy's role on the very front end was really just making sure that the dates and space could work. And the NCAA obviously needed the entire convention center because it's being turned into a giant student athlete village where the kids are going to be practicing in all the convention halls, plus the Sagamore Ballroom. The meeting and other ballrooms will be used for virtual classrooms and study halls and meeting rooms and things of that nature. And we had multiple groups that overlapped the dates the NCAA needed and the hotels that were going to be needed for this virtual bubble had groups that were in. Some cases, it were easy groups to move because the groups were questioning whether they were going to move forward. In other cases, the groups that were in said, we're definitely moving, and you're going to have to figure out how to help us. And so I would say it took about 7 or 8 weeks, frankly, well before, including some time well before this was ever publicly announced, of working with these other groups in the convention center and the hotel community and the NCAA to ultimately clear the dates and space. And there were a couple nights where, we wondered if that was going to happen. But I think, I never lost faith at the end of the day that we were ultimately going to pull this.
Could any other city or state pull this off?
Certainly there were ones that wanted to. But Indianapolis was really well positioned for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously, we already had the Final Four for 21, so it made sense that they start with us. Number two, the NCAA is headquartered here. So that relationship that goes back over 20 years of being here obviously helps. And then third, we have been designed, as you well know, Gary, to hold these kinds of events. Our campus downtown, with the hotels connected by enclosed skywalks, with the convention center connected to Lucas Oil Stadium, with Bankers Life 3 blocks up from Georgia Street. We're designed to do these sorts of things. So those three factors ultimately made us much better prepared than any other city. And so it made perfect sense to start and end with us.
What have the past 12 months or so been like for you personally? I mean, how challenging has it been? Was there I'm sure there was there a low point in this past 12 months that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I think the low point from my perspective was at some point in the summer, it hit me that we're not getting back this year. Early on when this first happened, it looked like it was going to be maybe a couple of weeks. We were all kind of in the dark and figuring out how this was going to go. But we thought it would be a couple of week break. But by the end of the summer, we'd have a Gen Con and the fall and winter would be good. In fact, we moved a lot of the March, April, May groups into the fall and winter of 2020. And by the time the middle of the summer came, it became really clear that nothing was going to happen convention-wise in 2020. We got some youth sports groups and we were able to make that work with the Marion County Public Health Department. But that was really, literally and figuratively, the only game in town all year.
Did you learn anything about yourself as a leader as you look back on this? I mean, we're still in the middle of it, but what did you learn through this process as a leader?
Well, a couple of things came to mind. Number one, I heard people referring to we're all in the same boat. And I didn't come up with this, but I had previously heard someone else say, we're not all in the same boat. We're actually all in different boats in the same storm. And, so for example, how a State Park Hotel Lodge was doing relative to a JW Marriott were very different boats. Some of the more rural, outdoor-oriented types of attractions were doing well under the pandemic conditions, and others weren't doing well. And so, I just wanted to figure out, how do I be the best leader I can be in our boat, given that it's not the same as everybody else's. The other thing that really hit me was that culture really matters. And if you have a strong organizational culture going into a crisis situation like this, you're certainly going to be potentially in much better shape than if you didn't. And if you don't, it would just exacerbate the situation. So I really see where we are now and feel really strongly that our organizational culture got us through to this point.
Leaders facing difficult times turn to things, maybe it's people or things for strength. Did you turn to anything as you went through those challenging times that kind of sustains you through the process?
Well, I would consider myself more spiritual than religious. That's what happens when you've got Hindus on mom's side, Presbyterians on dad's side, and you're married to a Mexican Catholic. And I went to Catholic high school and Catholic grad school, actually. So I have a lot of different perspectives. But without question, I probably prayed and had thoughtful reflection much more in the last year than I probably have in my entire life. The only other thing I can compare it to is to when my son was born, and he had a birth injury during his birth, and I got very religious while he was in the hospital.
Yeah. Having a sense of humor can help too sometimes through tough times. And you, Leonard Hoops, I found out, have a sense of humor. In fact, you've been doing stand-up comedy since high school, right?
That's true. And it all started with, we had this talent show at St. Joseph High School. And as a freshman, I decided to throw my hat in the ring and do it. And I did impressions of Howard Cosell interviewing Muhammad Ali. And it turned into Saturday Night Live types of skits. By my senior year in high school, this is absolutely true story, they had given my little troupe the entire talent show. We had the entire hour for our group by my senior year. And so it was almost a variety show. We had a music guest. I did some stand up. We did some skits. And it was really pretty dormant for decades. And then a couple of years ago, a comedian based in Indianapolis who tours nationally, Scott Long, who puts on a so-called celebrity comedy show for some good causes, asked me if I would perform in it. And I was as D-list a celebrity you could get given, my role. But I did it, and he invited me back a couple other times. And in fact, I got invited to do some non-celebrity shows at Crackers and, a couple other venues over the course of the last couple of years.
Hey, you mentioned your Howard Cosell impersonation. I think everybody thinks they have a good Howard Cosell impersonation, but yours is pretty good. Let's give it a listen.
All right. Well, we'll give it a try. It's not as good as it was when I was in high school, but Howard Cosell live at Madison Square Garden with the greatest fight of all time, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad, tell me about your fight with Joe Frazier. I'm the greatest fighter that's ever lived. I whooped Joe Frazier. I float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. I'm the greatest, Muhammad Ali.
That is very good. We got the bonus Muhammad Ali in there too. So very good. And I mentioned this in the intro. You always dreamed of being on Saturday Night Live. Where did you get that humor side, that entertainer side from?
Well, it's probably genetic from my father. He's since passed, but he was literally a rocket scientist, but he had an incredibly dry wit. And I grew up in the early 70s when SNL first came on air, the Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, John Belushi. I mean, those first seasons, Gilda Radner. And I found an immediate, I took to that style of comedy. And I think I'm kind of a natural smart aleck. My poor 8-year-old daughter, Avalon, has occasionally gotten in a bit of trouble with her second and third grade teachers over the last couple of years because she exhibits some traits. And every time she gets into a little bit of trouble and her mom wants to talk about it with her, she says, "But mommy, I got it from daddy." So, there's that, I guess.
Got it. Your story began a long way from in Indianapolis in Indiana, born on the island of Trinidad. You moved to Texas at age 5 and then spent really much of your life in California. Your dad, as you said, was literally a rocket scientist, your mom a realtor. What was it like growing up in the Hoops household?
Yeah, very different cultures. I'm definitely the product of two very different people. My dad is an English, Scottish, Irish American who came over. His family came over to the U.S. in 1683 on one of William Penn's ships. They were Quakers. My mom is an East Indian from the island of Trinidad. She was an island girl, and her family came over sometime in the 1800s as indentured servants from India. And that's about as much a dichotomy as I think you can get. One of the more interesting things is, their personalities were very different. Again, you have a guy who served in the U.S. Navy who was an electrical engineer, ultimately became a rocket scientist at Vandenberg Air Force Base, literally. My mom was a really successful realtor. In fact, she's still alive and in her mid-70s and still selling real estate. But I do believe that I'm a reflection of probably my dad's sense of humor. He had a lot of mathematical ability. I was a 99% SAT guy on the math part of the SAT. I got that purely from him. My mom is an incredible saleswoman on her real estate side. She's been doing it for decades and has won all sorts of awards. And I think my kind of visit industry sales background probably comes from her end. So that's about as much of a matchup. I even did a 23andMe DNA analysis, and damned if I didn't come out basically 50-50 English, Scottish, Irish, and 50-50 Indian, just like they said I was. So I really am them.
Wow, amazing. Santa Maria, California was home. Is it Northern California?
Central, really closer to like Pismo Beach and Santa Barbara, that area.
Okay. What do you remember about your first job?
Well, my first job, I think I was 13 years old. And so you had to get a work permit and you could only work a certain amount of hours. But it was the summer between my 8th grade year and my freshman year in high school. And I was a busboy at the Santa Maria Country Club. And I'd never golfed, but I would watch the golfers tee off before breakfast started. And then I'd go in and clean up the tables. My bonus part of that being that busboy job is I got to make the chef salads in the morning. So I would get to, shred the cheese and throw it on the lettuce and put some beets on there and some ham and some things like that. But that was a lot more fun than bussing and dishwashing.
Okay, we talked about your background and your parents' background, science and sales, but you went to college to major in journalism, San Jose State. What steered you toward a journalism career?
I absolutely wanted to be engaged in sports in some way, shape, or form. And so it wasn't so much journalism because I didn't want to write about politics or, cover business or anything like that. I wanted to cover sports. And I was, a decent athlete. I played a little bit of high school sports, and I was like a good little league baseball player. And by my senior year, I started golfing and was on the high school golf team. And I just thought, hey, since I'm not really good enough to be a professional in anything, maybe if I cover it, I'll get to do these sorts of things. And so I went for that journalism degree, and I was a sports writer on the Spartan Daily, and then a columnist. But I didn't ultimately pursue that path after I.
You had a turning point though, right? And I think it was in the San Francisco Giants locker room that was that aha moment and said, maybe I don't want to do this.
Yeah, that's true. I was covering a San Francisco Giants ball game. I think it was against the St. Louis Cardinals, if I remember right. And it was at Candlestick Park, and they had San Jose State Day. So it was my first time being allowed into the Giants locker room after the game. I had a Spartan Daily press card. They let me in, and I was interviewing some players. And I'm going to save him the embarrassment because he's still around in some way, shape, or form in sports. But a ball player was incredibly rude to me. He didn't know what the heck I was doing in the locker room. He didn't use those words. And really, I was really put off by just how arrogant and rude he was. And one of the other ball players, I will mention his name, Mike Krukow, who was the pitcher that day, waved me over and said, come over here. Don't listen to that guy. He's kind of a jerk. Ask me whatever you want to ask me. And I asked him some questions about San Jose State Day and things like that. But it made me think as I drove home to my apartment that night from Candlestick, it was a bit eye-opening in that I thought to myself, is this how it's going to be every day? And I'm sure that one particular athlete doesn't represent them all, but it was enough to make me wonder if that was what I wanted to do for a living.
Learning moment for sure. We're going to talk about your career in tourism in a moment. But first, that ticking sound of the stopwatch, Leonard, is our 2-minute drill where we ask you pressing questions of the day and ask for a very quick response. So are you game?
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome. All right, here we go. Let's start with your favorite way to relax.
Hanging out with my family, watching a movie.
How about your favorite Caribbean dish?
My mother's roti. It's kind of a Caribbean burrito.
Caribbean burrito. Okay, very good.
It might have curried shrimp in it or any number of other things.
Outstanding. Text or email?
I'm more text.
Okay, here's a tough one. Toilet paper, over or under?
Over. That shouldn't be asked.
There's no question. I agree. Ocean or desert?
Oh, ocean.
Favorite fast food restaurant?
I hate to say it because they're not in Indiana, but In-N-Out Burger in California. Every chance I can get an In-N-Out when I'm traveling, I take it.
Can you work on that? Can Visit Indy work on helping to get them here?
It is one of my bucket list goals to bring an In-N-Out to Indianapolis.
Beer or wine?
Wine, specifically champagne.
Very good. Dine in or carry out?
I dine in. I prefer those days.
Dog or cat?
I've had both. I actually think I like cats slightly more just because they don't need as much care. They're independent.
Okay, final question. This is a tough one to answer, but I'll ask you anyway. Will Indy host another Super Bowl?
I believe we will. I think one day they are going to recognize that it ought to be awarded to the city that did it best.
I like that. I like that answer. And obviously, as you well know, we did a great job hosting a number of years ago. So, Leonard, you did a great job on the 2-minute drill. We're going to come back and explore how you turned a PR job at a Fortune 120 company where you met your future wife as well into a career in the convention business and ultimately a home in Indianapolis. That's when Business and Beyond returns. Welcome back to Business and Beyond, presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick, and pleased to be joined by Leonard Hoops, the president and CEO of Visit Indy, the region's tourism and hospitality group. Experienced and helped Indianapolis experience tremendous growth in the industry over the past decade. Leonard's tenure in Indianapolis. Leonard, let's go back. 1993, we talked about your potential career in journalism, and you shifted to PR, to public relations, landed a position at FMC Corporation, big company, Fortune 120 company. That's where you would meet your future wife, Doreen, but you actually didn't start dating right away, right? There was kind of is there a backstory to that on how you ultimately began to date?
Yeah, it sounds a bit scandalous because my wife was my HR manager at FMC. I actually got started there in late 1988, and I still remember the day in 1993 that I met her. It was her first day on the job, September 20th, 1993. And I remember that because my dad's birthday was September 20th. And so we were, I guess, friendly colleagues. I wouldn't even call us friends at the time. And I eventually left FMC and went to work for the San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau. And she also she got transferred actually from California to a division in Pennsylvania for FMC. And we lost touch. There was no Facebook or social media or even texting really back then. And so we just lost track. And then one day out of the blue, I get a phone call in 1996 from Doreen, then Doreen Rodriguez, saying, "Hey, do you remember me? Your old HR manager. I'm back in town. I'm not with FMC anymore. I had your work number in my day planner, and I'm near your convention center. Just thought maybe I'd see if you were available for lunch." And that's we just started hanging out, and we were both single at the time. And it took about 6 months actually of hanging out for lunches before we actually started dating. Even then.
Outstanding. You've been married now 21 years, 2 children, Cannon, who is 16, a daughter, Avalon, who I think will be 9 later this month.
And another 2 weeks, yeah.
Wow. And I know, having been around you, and that family is by far the most important aspect of your life. You mentioned this earlier, but your son, Cannon, had a birth injury, severe oxygen deprivation during delivery. And you talked about spirituality kind of coming out at that point for you. What was that process? What was that experience like for you and your wife?
Well, we'd never had any kids, and so we didn't know how a delivery typically would go anyway. And when all of a sudden bells and whistles were going off, alarms for oxygen monitors and things like that, we didn't know what was happening. And so he came out not breathing. If you've had kids, you probably have heard of the APGAR scores, and he had an APGAR score of like 2. He was immediately taken to the neonatal intensive care unit, and we didn't even get to really hold him. The next morning, after a night of fitful sleep, they told us we're not sure if he's going to make it through the day. And they didn't give us odds, but they basically described a 50-50 scenario. Long story short, he was put into a medically induced coma. He spent 10 days in that coma, and then he came out of it. And on December 23rd, right around Christmas time, he was sent home. We got to take him home. And those were 23 days from December 1st to 23rd that felt like an eternity. I mean, it just every day, especially when he was in the coma, just waiting for him to wake up. And so you really, you have a lot of conversations with the higher power, just asking, what does this mean? But it ultimately really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I'm grateful for seeing now that I didn't see before.
Yeah. Cannon, today, 16 years old, doesn't walk, gets around with a power chair. He's a wonderful kid with a great spirit. I've been around him a little bit at Colts games. You've had him there. And a smart kid who's often underestimated by teachers, right? And there's some funny stories about that.
Yeah, 2 that make me laugh right off the bat. One, he this might have been 2nd or 3rd grade. He's in 8th now, but he one day changed the password to the classroom laptop, and this is before all the kids had their Chromebooks and things now with virtual learning. So there was one classroom laptop, and so they brought in the teacher couldn't figure out how to fix it. They brought in the IT person for that particular school. He couldn't fix it, so they called in the division, the entire IPS. IT person to come in, and the division person came in and said, "Well, did you ask the kid?" And the teacher said no. So they said, "Cannon, do you know what you did with the laptop?" And Cannon's shaking his head, "Yes." "Can you open the laptop for us? Can you unlock it?" Cannon's like, "Yes." And he put in the password. He had changed the password to his own that he had at home, and his own teacher, who knew he was smart and tell other people not to underestimate him, didn't ask him the simple question of, "Can you unlock it, Cannon?" There's one other story where he set up an appointment to go look at cars at CarMax, and I got a voicemail from the sales guy at CarMax, and I didn't realize what the heck was going on until he ended the conversation, the voicemail, by saying, "Okay, Cannon, we'll see you tomorrow to see some cars."
I love it. And Doreen, your wife, interesting. I know she's pivoted in her career. She's now a neuro movement therapist, right?
Right. She was an executive in human resources in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, was a VP for both private and public companies. And after Cannon's birth injury, a couple years after that, she decided she was going to stay home full time with him, and then began getting training to be certified as a neuromovement therapist, which is a form of therapy that we found Cannon best responded to with his particular injury. And so now she not only helps Cannon, but others with similar conditions.
Yeah. And Doreen, your wife was really the one who said, when you got the call to interview for the Indianapolis job, she said, yeah, that's one you ought to take.
Yeah, that's a true story. I was the executive VP for San Francisco Travel, their version of Visit Indy. And that's by the nature of that kind of job, you are on the call list for recruiters. So we got a number of calls over the course of a couple of years, and I'd go home and mention that X, Y, or Z city to Doreen, and she said, nope, we're not leaving California. And then one day, for whatever reason, she said, I came home and I said, well, Indianapolis called. And she goes, I remember when you visited Indy on a business trip years ago, you really liked that place. You know what? I think you should interview for this one. And she says in hindsight, the moment those words came out of her mouth, she knew we were going to go live in Indy.
Yeah. Leonard, 10 years, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it certainly has been a decade. Can you characterize, because there's been so much growth, so much positive activity and positive vibe, if you will, around Indianapolis, not just here internally, but importantly, outside of the city, outside of the state, how others look at Indianapolis. Can you describe that?
Well, I'm definitely a subscriber and a beneficiary of the better lucky than good philosophy. I came to Indy at the right time, I think, because this city has been, go back to the late 60s under Mayor Lugar and the formation of the Capital Improvement Board. I think that's where you can really point to a lot of things that have emerged and really set hold in the 2020s. We built the Convention Center in 1972. We built Market Square Arena. We built a football stadium with no team and then got the team here. We hosted the Pan Am Games. We were the NCAA. We had a Phase 5 Convention Center expansion that added the JW Marriott. We hosted a Super Bowl. I mean, those all things happened pretty consistently. White River State Park was developed. Circle Center Mall was redeveloped over the course of the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And so you had a city that was, as you well know, Gary, referred to derogatorily, pejoratively as Indianoplace. And all of a sudden, we are, in 2014, USA Today's #1 ranked convention city, which is unimaginable. I remember Mayor Hudnut, before he passed away, for the dedication of the Hudnut Commons statue, he and I were sitting next to each other having breakfast before that dedication. And he hadn't met me, and I hadn't met him. And, I explained I was the guy that replaced a guy who replaced Bill McGowan because he knew Bill. And he said, I just can't believe that you said we're USA Today's #1 convention city. I said, yes, sir. And he goes, I just could never have imagined that, when we started doing these things, that, the Las Vegas is and San Francisco of the world, that Indy is the #1 convention city.
Yeah. Wow. There was another challenging point in your tenure here, certainly challenging for the city and the state. And that was the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the RFRA. They got so much attention, and again, importantly, from outside of the state. How challenging was that? And how serious was the threat? Kind of your thought process back then when Indianapolis and Indiana was really being painted in a very, very negative light nationally.
Without question, that probably the #2 challenge behind the pandemic in the 10 years that I've been here, with a really clear gap between #2 and #3 after that. The pandemic and RFRA have been the big two. And I knew from my peers in other cities who have been through similar things, Arizona and some things, that this was going to be a big deal. And we'd had discussions with the governor and legislators beforehand saying, this is really going to blow up. Let's not do this. And they felt confident that it wouldn't. It did, obviously. I will give a ton of credit both to the Speaker, the President of the Senate, to then Governor Pence, for ultimately seeing the light that rather than digging their heels in, they actually agreed to make some changes that ended that fairly quickly. In fact, ultimately, that was amended before it could become law. That was definitely an impact. It had a nearly 10-figure. Actually, we were in the low 10 figures in terms of potential canceled business, the economic impact of potential canceled business before we got that thing amended. So it really could have blown up. Fortunately, we really kind of dodged something, I think, that was could have been more significant than it was.
Leonard, looking forward, what's next for Indianapolis? You mentioned the expansions, the numerous expansions that have now put Indianapolis in competition with the biggest players in the convention business. As you look at, convention hotels and other convention expansion, those types of things, where do you see the business? Obviously, you got to get through the pandemic and where things are now, but what's the future look like for tourism in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I wanted to add one other thing about the RIFRA real quick, too, before I answer that question. That is that the other thing was, ultimately, it was a right thing to do for individual rights. And one of the things that we did right after that amendment happened is we recruited the international version of Pride Festival organizers to come to Indianapolis. And they ended up picking us over a number of other cities to have that event a few years later. And that was one of my proudest moments, is to be able to not only get a RIFRA amended, but the fact we got the International Pride Organization out here to host their event. Moving on to your question about what's next for us, we started working actually under Mayor Ballard's last couple of years to say what's next. Phase 5 was opened in 2011. That replaced the RCA Dome space with exhibit space. We added the JW Marriott. But this is a business where you've got to constantly upgrade your product. Just like a theme park's got to bring in new attractions and rides and things of that nature. And we also knew that if you don't start in 2014, it'll probably take another decade by the time something comes out of the ground. And sure enough, that's how this Phase 6 expansion and the Signia Hilton is probably going to work out. One of the things that I really look at Indianapolis with a lot of pride is that in the middle of a pandemic, our city county council voted 25-0 to approve the bond measure to do Phase 6 expansion on Pan Am Plaza. And then the private developer, Kai Realty, is going to build the Signia Hilton attached to that Phase 6 expansion and with some shared space. So, where else can you get a bipartisan 25-0 vote to expand a business that's basically on hold during a pandemic than in Indianapolis? That is a very Indy thing to happen.
Yeah, outstanding. Hey, before we go, very quickly, we're doing this socially distanced, virtually, of course. What's the pillow over your left shoulder?
Well, that is a pillow that our senior VP of marketing, Chris Gall, gave to me. It's a photo of me accepting. This is the better lucky than good, aspect of my life again. 2018, the Indiana Historical Society named me an Indiana Living Legend, which is embarrassing to say, but I don't have enough integrity to have not accepted, so I went ahead and accepted that. And, it's an award that David Letterman, Peyton Manning, Jane Pauley have won. I'm not anywhere in that class, but Chris took a photo from that event and put it on a pillow. And now it sits on the couch in my office. That's
a good looking pillow. I like it, Leonard. And believe me, you were very deserving of that honor. And certainly we are very thankful that you took time to join us on the Business and Beyond podcast. Leonard Hoops, the president and CEO at Visit Indy. Leonard, all the best to you and your lovely family, and look forward to catching up with you soon and looking for more growth from the Visit Indy and the tourism sector.
Well, thank you, Gary. And my short list of Indiana Living Legends, you are one of them, and I wish you great luck with the Inside Indiana Business podcast as you move forward.
Oh, thanks, Leonard. We'll talk to you soon. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. And if you want to learn more information about the podcast or get Indiana business news 24/7, all you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.